Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Cutler. Happy to have you here. I am responsible for intellectual property at NGen, and what I'm going to do this morning with you is go over the intellectual property aspects of your initial application. You should be aware, for the purposes of our talk this morning, that I'm going to assume that you have a basic understanding of intellectual property. However, if you need individual coaching or instructions or meetings on intellectual property generally, please feel free to contact us, as we're here to help. So the most important thing that you need to know at the moment is that all projects must have an IP plan, and that IP plan, at least in an initial form, must be submitted with the initial project application. The project IP plan needs to set forth what IP you foresee will be generated during the project. It must also set forth how you and your project participants foresee that that IP will be managed, protected, and exploited both during the project and after the project. NGen IP staff are here to help you with this. We're here to provide guidance and education with respect to IP. We're here to help applicants in their development of IP plans. And we also maintain what's called an IP registry. The IP registry is basically a searchable database of all IP that is created during NGen projects that project applicants or participants wish to advise is available for licensing or for commercialization opportunities to other NGen members. Having a good IP plan will also help in the definition and focus on the project. Creating the plan will require discussions and negotiations amongst the project participants, but having a clear IP plan up front will help the rest of the application go smoothly. In addition, we require that a collaboration agreement be signed amongst the project participants for all projects selected for funding. And some of the terms of those collaboration agreements relate to IP management and licensing. And having these discussions up front will help smooth the creation and negotiation of the collaboration agreement later on if you are selected for funding. So as potential individual project participants, prior to beginning these discussions and sharing information, here's some suggestions that we have for you. For all of your background IP, we would suggest that that IP be protected, or at least consideration being given to protecting that IP before any sharing of that IP occurs. So for example, if your background IP is a patentable innovation, we would suggest that you file a patent application on that subject matter prior to disclosing it to other potential project participants. We would also suggest that you put a non-disclosure agreement in place to protect the confidentiality of all exchanged information prior to exchanging that information. And finally, we would suggest that you only exchange the information that you actually need to exchange. So for example, you don't need to share the specifics of trade secrets at this time unless it's absolutely necessary. With respect to foreground IP, and since foreground IP is not that common of a term, what we mean by foreground IP is the IP that you project will be created during the project. We suggest that you give some thought as to who will own and have access to that IP before beginning any discussions. So for example, you might want to think about who is going to own the results of a brainstorming meeting before you actually enter into the brainstorming meeting. You can have retroactive contracts which will deal with ownership, but it's usually easier to have these negotiations before you have the brainstorming sessions than after you've had the brainstorming session. You should also bear in mind, for example, that with respect to some types of intellectual property, inventorship or creatorship determines who is the first owner. And in many instances, using that rule to determine ownership of IP isn't the best or doesn't give the best results. So one thing that we suggest that project participants do right up front is good prior art searching. And we suggest that that prior art search be pretty extensive. So we would suggest searching prior patents, prior scientific literature, general Google searches or internet searches to determine what competitor products exist or have existed, or what similar products exist or have existed, to really have a complete overview of the state of the art as it exists prior to you beginning your project. Now, there are a number of benefits that you will realize by doing this, and we only put a few of them down, but in particular, you can avoid reinventing the wheel. So, for example, if something has already been invented, you can use the description of it in prior art rather than having to re-engineer it yourself. In addition, with respect to patents at least, you can identify freedom to operate issues quite early, and that will give you the time to deal with them or minimize the risk that they present. Finally, you can use it to determine who else is working in the area and potentially partner with them, or at least be aware of them or enter into a supplier relationship with them. It will give you a good idea of the competitive landscape. We've put on the slide a number of free patent searching tools. Obviously, there's Google Patents, which I personally like the best myself, simply because it's the familiar Google interface, and I find the information is very easily readable and presented, and you can get one-click patents from there. There are other ones as well, Patent Lens, EspaceNet, as well as the national patent offices. Further, as I'm sure you're aware, there is also Google Scholar and Google generally to do internet searches. And after you've done all these searches and analyzed the results, you're likely to have a better understanding of how your project will advance the state of the art or will be transformative in some way. And in many cases, having this information will help you answer better the 8 assessment questions that you're being asked to answer in the general application. So for the purposes of an NGen project, we encourage you to think about intellectual property more broadly than simply intellectual property rights. So intellectual property might be know-how, trade secrets, ideas, drawings, data, copyright, software, trademarks, designs, patents, or confidential information. Okay, so what needs to be in your IP plan? So before we get started on this, I just wanted to let you know that we have created some templates which you can use to provide this information. I'm just going to give you a high-level view of the information first, and then we'll go over the templates. So one thing that needs to be in your IP plan is a high-level description of how each company currently handles its IP. So both in terms of how it protects its IP and how it exploits its IP. A second thing that should be in there is whether or not an FTO analysis has been completed. And if it has been completed, provide a brief summary of the results. If it has not been completed, please either explain why, briefly, or let us know that it will be done in the future. Remember that an FTO is an exercise in risk identification and mitigation, and so there are likely going to be some FTO-related risks listed in your risk register. So a third thing that needs to be in the IP plan is a list of background IP that each company is bringing to the project, as well as who in the consortium will need access to that background IP to complete their part of the project. A fourth thing that needs to be in the IP plan is a list of the foreground IP you foresee at this point in time will be generated by the project, who will own that IP, and how that IP will be protected. A fifth thing should be how you will share or license that foreground IP, And a sixth thing will be how each company will exploit or commercialize IP. Mostly that is the foreground IP, but it may be some background IP as well that is necessary for the exploitation of the foreground IP. Okay, so now we're going to go through a few steps we think might be beneficial for you in the creation of at least portions of your IP plan. So as we've put here, step one, ensure project alignment and focus amongst the various project participants. So what is your market opportunity here? Who are the potential customers? Who are the potential competitors? What is the geographic scope of what it is that you intend to do? Define your solution or approach to the market opportunity, both overall and in terms of each portion or component of the solution itself. You can discuss and identify where you think the innovations, technical or performance advances are going to occur, because it's likely that those are the areas where you're going to be generating IP. Define each member's role in the project. Who is doing what? Why are they there? What are they bringing to the table? What are they going to do? And what do they expect to result? Define what benefits each of the members expect to receive from the project. What are their business intentions? What are the technical advances or innovations that they think that they're going to need to benefit from the project itself? Now you can make use of some of the templates that we have provided. So in step two, we're going to identify the intellectual property, its ownership, and its licensing. So in step two, we're going to make a list of all of the background IP relevant to the project. Now remember, background IP only needs to be shared with other project members if it is required by another team member to either carry out their role in the project or because they're going to need it to exploit the foreground IP after the project is over. So what that means is each project participant may have background IP that they are bringing to the project, and it should be listed, but it's not going to be shared because nobody else needs it other than them to complete the project. So the table has a number of columns, and I think the columns are pretty self-explanatory, and we've gone over the information that's required, so I'm not going to read them out to you again, but if you have any questions, please ask. Okay, so our next template focuses on foreground IP and identifying that IP, who's going to own it, and who needs a license to it. So this is where the solution approach that we did in step one will come in handy, because as you solve the problems, you're more likely to be generating IP than not. In particular, the more difficult areas are likely to generate more IP. Now remember, this table is really your best guess at this point in time. We're not expecting anyone to have a crystal ball, and nor is anyone going to be penalized for not being held to it. So again, we've gone over the information that is required in the plan, and the table reproduces that information. And in the various columns, you can organize and put that information in. I'm not going to read out the column titles to you. When you get or go to the website and you pull down the template, if you have any questions, be sure to ask them. We've tried to make it as self-explanatory as possible. Now, the third step is really about looking about what possibilities or opportunities there are for the use and commercialization of the IP beyond the project itself. And what we're doing here, again, in this template, is asking for information that may spur you to find other opportunities to commercialize the IP beyond simply the results of the project. And again, these columns aren't really a make-work project. We're really trying to get participants to think about their IP as it's a valuable asset, and it may be valuable in areas beyond their immediate consideration. So if you have any questions about anything that we've written down in one of the columns, again, please ask. Okay, so once you have filled out the tables that we have just discussed, you are ready to draft the plan. Bear in mind that we're not looking here for a treatise, just a brief summary at this point in time, providing the information that we discussed earlier to the extent that it's not already contained in one of the tables. And with respect to anything that is going on in the future, such as licensing, be it internally between the project applicants or externally, we don't expect the details of that at all at this time. What we're really doing is looking for simply bullet points or high-level summaries of what it is you intend to do. Bear in mind that, as well as we said earlier, the IP plan will likely form a lot of the basis of the collaboration agreement sections. And therefore, to the extent that you have detailed or at least thought about the information, it will make the collaboration agreement negotiations go much smoother. Okay, so now as a last thing, we wanted to turn to some NGen IP plan myths or things that we have heard in the past that aren't exactly correct. The first one is that you must share all your IP with the project consortium members. That is completely untrue. You do not need to share all your IP with the project consortium members. As we said in the slide, in order to have a truly collaborative project, everyone needs to participate and to achieve something at the end. We expect that each party will have access to what they need to commercialize their new product or process or development at the end of the project and to continue improve their technology beyond. That's all we expect. So to the extent that IP is needed for that, then that will have to be negotiated between the parties where it makes sense. But to the extent that IP is not needed for that, then it doesn't need to be shared at all. Number two, we do not expect license or access beyond the project to be royalty-free between the parties. What we do expect, and what the collaboration agreement must have, are licensing terms during and after the project, recognizing the right of each participant to access on fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms, and subject to relevant competitive issues, all foreground IP arising from the project, at least for internal R&D purposes. And if background IP is required for exploitation of the results of the project's foreground IP, access to that background IP must be negotiated on fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms. The second myth that we wanted to sort of bring to your attention is, well, you don't have to share all of your IP with the global innovation ecosystem. We do encourage sharing, and we try and help project participants realize the potential opportunities and advantages that may be created by sharing their IP, but only when it commercially makes sense to them. Companies will not be forced to disclose sensitive information or to license their competitors. Instead, the goal is to help companies find other non-competitive application companies to license to if that's part of the company's business plans. Remember, by licensing IP, you can potentially strengthen your IP by adoption of technology across more applications and markets, creating additional revenue that can be reinvested back in your organization, creating partners rather than adversaries who may wish to weaken or design around your patents, and developing relationships with companies which can lead to further joint development activities. So to close, we'd like to leave you with some final tips. There is a project IP plan guide for applicants, and it is available on our website in the project info and guide section. And along with that IP plan guide are the templates for the tables that we referred to earlier in this presentation. In addition, if you like, you can read the NGen intellectual property strategy, which can be found in the same place, which is intellectual property strategy for NGen at the NGen corporate level. Finally, we encourage you to work with your partners to develop the IP plan. Do not try and develop the IP plan in solos. And the earlier you get to working on this, the better. Finally, NGen does allow for funding for patent costs for SMEs to protect the foreground IP generated by the project to be claimed as eligible expenses during the project. If you see the relevant financial guide for the AI stream, you will find the particular details. So to wrap it up, if you have any questions that were not answered or do not get answered, can you please email us at ai@ngen.ca and we would be happy to help.